Lewis Hamilton crossed the line smiling in Canada. But seconds earlier, his radio told a completely different story. A furious Hamilton message exposed what Ferrari was desperately trying to hide. The SF26 is losing massive power on the straights. And the deeper Ferrari investigated the data after the race, the worse the situation became. Because while Hamilton somehow fought Max Verstappen for the podium, Charles Leclerc was trapped inside what he later called one of the worst weekends of his entire career. Same team, same engine, same race, completely different emotional breakdown. But here is where everything changes. According to the information emerging after Canada, Ferrari could still be missing more than 20 horsepower compared to Mercedes. 20 horsepower. In modern Formula One, that is catastrophic. That is the difference between defending comfortably and getting attacked every single lap. And Hamilton could feel it in real time. Every straight, every acceleration zone, every failed attempt to pull away. Now the tension inside Ferrari is exploding for one terrifying reason. Hamilton is finally learning how to unlock the SF26. Right when Ferrari discovers the engine itself may be fundamentally too weak to fight for the championship. And once you hear what Hamilton said over the radio, the entire Canada Grand Prix suddenly looks completely different. Subscribe if you love Formula One stories that reveal what teams do not want fans to notice. At first, Ferrari tried to stay calm. Publicly, the team kept repeating the usual Formula One language. We need to analyze the data. We still have positives. We understand where we can improve. But inside the garage, the atmosphere after Canada was far more tense than people realized. Because Lewis Hamilton's radio messages during the race exposed something Ferrari could no longer hide. The SF26 was struggling badly on power delivery, and Hamilton could feel it lap after lap. Now, to understand why this became such a massive issue, you need to understand something important about Montreal. Canada is brutal on engines, not just because of top speed, because of repetition. Brake hard, accelerate hard, brake again, accelerate again, over and over. The engine never really rests, which means any horsepower weakness becomes painfully visible very quickly. That is exactly what happened to Ferrari. And Hamilton noticed it almost immediately once the race settled down. Because every time he exited a corner behind another car, the Ferrari struggled to gain speed cleanly on the straights. Think about trying to sprint while carrying resistance bands tied around your waist. You can still move fast, but every acceleration feels heavier than it should. That was Hamilton's reality in Canada. And the frustration started building. Not because the SF26 was completely undrivable. Actually, the opposite. For the first time all season, Hamilton was finally starting to trust the car through corners. That is what made the situation so painful. The balance was improving. The confidence was improving. But the straight-line speed deficit kept ruining the momentum. And this is where the emotional split inside Ferrari became impossible to ignore. Hamilton responded with adaptation. Leclerc responded with frustration. Charles spent most of the race trapped in traffic, unable to attack naturally because the Ferrari simply did not have enough speed advantage to complete overtakes comfortably. And once dirty air started overheating the tires, the entire situation spiraled even further. Leclerc later admitted he never found confidence with the car all weekend. But Hamilton approached the crisis differently. Instead of forcing impossible overtakes early, he started managing the race strategically. Earlier braking, smoother exits, protecting tire temperatures, waiting for opportunities instead of creating desperation. And Ferrari engineers immediately noticed something important. Lewis was compensating for the power deficit with race intelligence. That is not easy, because missing horsepower affects everything. Overtakes become harder. Defending becomes harder. Tire management becomes harder. Even braking changes, because drivers push deeper into corners trying to recover lost time from the straights. One weakness spreads across the entire car. That is why Canada became such a revealing weekend. It exposed Ferrari's hidden problem in the worst possible environment. And then the numbers after the race made the situation even more alarming. According to the internal concerns emerging from Ferrari after Canada, the engine deficit compared to Mercedes may still be around 22 to 25 horsepower. That is enormous, especially in modern Formula One, where the performance gaps between top teams are usually incredibly small. And suddenly Hamilton's frustration over the radio started sounding less emotional and more like a warning, because the 7-time world champion could feel exactly what the data later confirmed. Ferrari was losing too much performance in the areas where championships are usually decided. The straights, the acceleration zones, the exits under pressure. And this creates a terrifying contradiction inside Ferrari right now. For months, the biggest fear was whether Hamilton could adapt to the SF26. Canada may have finally answered that question. Yes, but now a far bigger fear is replacing it. What if Hamilton adapts perfectly, and the engine still is not good enough to fight consistently for victories? Because if that happens, Ferrari faces the worst scenario imaginable. A driver finally ready to challenge for wins, inside a car that still cannot fully support him. Then came the moment that changed the entire mood inside Ferrari's garage. George Russell retired from the lead. Safety car. Instant reset. And suddenly, Ferrari had a real opportunity. Because before that moment, Hamilton was managing damage. After the safety car, he started smelling the podium. The team reacted immediately. Hamilton into the pits. Fresh hard tires. Aggressive strategy call. And for a few laps, everything looked perfect. The stop was fast. The track position improved. The tires came alive quickly. Hamilton began hunting Verstappen. But underneath that excitement, the same hidden problem was still there. The engine deficit. And this is where Hamilton's frustration became impossible to ignore. Because every time he got close enough to truly pressure Verstappen, the Ferrari struggled to finish the job cleanly on acceleration. Now imagine trying to punch underwater. You can still move forward, but the resistance slows everything down. That was Hamilton's fight in Canada. The SF26 had enough cornering balance to stay close, but not enough straight-line force to dominate naturally. And Hamilton knew it. That is why his radio tone became sharper as the race evolved. Not panic, not anger at the team, frustration at the limitation itself. Because drivers at Hamilton's level instantly feel when a car is capable of more than the engine allows. And Canada was probably the first weekend where Lewis fully understood Ferrari's real problem. Not the balance, not adaptation, power. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Leclerc's race was collapsing emotionally. While Hamilton slowly built confidence lap after lap, Charles looked trapped inside a cycle he could not escape. Traffic destroyed tire temperatures. Tire instability killed braking confidence. Braking hesitation ruined corner exits. And weak corner exits became even more painful because Ferrari lacked straight-line speed to recover naturally. Everything connected together. That is why Leclerc later described the weekend in such brutal terms. Not because of one isolated mistake. Because the entire car felt disconnected underneath him from Friday onward. And inside Ferrari, engineers started realizing something deeply uncomfortable. Hamilton and Leclerc were reacting to the same weakness in completely opposite ways. Lewis adapted around the problem. Charles kept fighting directly against it. Neither approach was fully wrong. But only one produced results in Canada. And suddenly, the emotional balance inside Ferrari started shifting. You could feel it after the race. Hamilton sounded optimistic, relieved, even energized. Leclerc sounded exhausted. That contrast matters more than people think. Because Formula One teams naturally move toward momentum, toward the driver generating confidence, toward the side of the garage creating solutions instead of confusion. Canada may have been the first race where Hamilton truly felt like the emotional center of Ferrari. And that creates enormous pressure moving forward. Especially because Ferrari now understands the scale of the engine problem much more clearly. According to the concerns emerging after Canada, the SF26 may still be massively behind Mercedes in raw horsepower. Not 1 or 2 horsepower. More than 20. That is a structural issue. And structural issues are terrifying in Formula One because they cannot be solved overnight. Aerodynamic tweaks help. Setup changes help. Driver adaptation helps. Missing engine performance is much harder to hide. Which is why the FIA recalibration process suddenly became Ferrari's biggest source of hope. Because if Ferrari officially receives additional development flexibility, the team may finally get a chance to attack the one weakness destroying their championship momentum. But there is another layer here almost nobody is talking about yet. What happens if Ferrari fixes the engine later in the season? After Hamilton has already fully adapted to the SF26. That possibility is starting to scare rival teams. Because Canada revealed something important beneath all the tension and frustration. Lewis Hamilton is no longer trying to survive at Ferrari. He is starting to understand how to fight with it. And this is where Ferrari's situation becomes genuinely dangerous for the rest of Formula One. Because Canada may have exposed Ferrari's weakness, but it also revealed Ferrari's future potential. For the first time all season, Lewis Hamilton looked completely synchronized with the SF26 over a full race distance. Not just one qualifying lap, not one strong stint. an entire Grand Prix. That changes the entire emotional picture inside Maranello, because confidence in Formula One spreads faster than upgrades do. When a driver trusts the car, engineers become more aggressive. Strategists become bolder. Mechanics work differently. Everything inside the garage feels lighter. That is exactly the atmosphere Hamilton created after Canada. And Ferrari desperately needed that feeling. Because underneath the podium celebration, the championship situation is becoming brutal. Mercedes keeps extending the gap. McLaren continues developing aggressively. Red Bull still has Verstappen. Ferrari cannot afford many more weekends where the engine deficit controls the entire race, especially now that the problem has become public. And honestly, this may explain why Hamilton's radio frustration hit so hard internally. Not because of the message itself, because everybody inside Ferrari already knew he was right. The straight line weakness is real. The acceleration losses are measurable. And drivers can only compensate for so long before physics wins. That is the terrifying truth Ferrari is now facing. The team may finally have unlocked Hamilton emotionally, right when they discover the technical package itself still has a major limitation. And there is another hidden problem quietly growing underneath all of this: Leclerc. Because while Hamilton leaves Canada with momentum, Charles leaves carrying doubt. And doubt is incredibly dangerous in Formula One, especially for drivers who rely heavily on instinct and confidence under braking. Leclerc openly admitted he felt disconnected from the car almost the entire weekend. That is not something drivers forget immediately. Those feelings stay with you. They change how aggressively you attack corners. They change how naturally you trust setups. Sometimes they even change the relationship between driver and engineers. And if Ferrari cannot quickly stabilize the SF26 for Leclerc, the internal tension inside the garage could become enormous. Because now there are two completely different emotional trajectories happening at the same time. Hamilton rising, Leclerc struggling. And Formula One teams always feel those shifts long before the public notices them fully. But here is where the story takes one final dramatic turn. The next race is Monaco, a circuit where straight-line power matters less than almost anywhere else. A place where confidence, rhythm, braking precision, and corner balance become everything. Exactly the areas where Hamilton suddenly looked transformed in Canada. That should worry everybody. Because if Ferrari's biggest weakness becomes less important at Monaco, and Hamilton carries this momentum forward, Ferrari could suddenly look far more competitive than the Canada data suggests. And imagine the psychological impact if Hamilton wins or fights for victory there. The entire narrative around Ferrari changes overnight. Suddenly the adaptation questions disappear. Suddenly the pressure shifts toward rivals. Suddenly Hamilton becomes the center of the championship conversation again. That possibility no longer feels impossible after Canada. But Ferrari still has one final challenge that may define their entire season. Can they solve the engine crisis before the growing pressure inside the team starts tearing the project apart? Because Canada revealed something much bigger than a frustrated radio message. It revealed a Ferrari caught between two realities: a car finally becoming comfortable for Lewis Hamilton, and an engine package that may still be too weak to deliver the championship both drivers came to fight for.